that Yuri Gagarin was on the suburb boundaries, and a number of links to the suburb and the boundaries of the suburb, and I hope some quirky links feature in the presentation. Why do I give it? Well, on the 14th of July, 1961, I was at my primary school, which was only a short walk from Highgate Cemetery. Fortunately, I wasn't given the day off like someone I'll be mentioning in the presentation, and is a good friend to the Hampstead Garden Suburb Astronomical Society, and it shaped his career. But I was living a few yards from where Yuri Gagarin came. I'm not an astronomer or a scientist, but I have had the honor to do some science engagement with UCL and Francisco Diego, some of you may well know, on various things in terms of, and others, Professor Williams, on near-Earth object studies and eclipses and other things to do with the calendar. I've traveled around the world and to places like Venus Point and to some of the astronomical sites in the USA, the installations. And I take an interest. I lead walks on the Heath. I do daylight walks on astronomy on the Heath as part of the program that the Heath and Hampstead Society do. And I've led walks in the City of London on astronomy. And I'll say a little bit about astronomical heritage in the city in the talk. So with that, off we go. It was 60 years ago on the 14th of July, 1961, that Yuri Gagarin, Friday, came up to the suburb, to the edge of the suburb, and went into Highgate Cemetery. I wonder if he visited other places in and around the area, in particular the Soviet trade delegation on Highgate West Hill. Last year was the 100th anniversary, 24th of February, of the first foreign, that is outside the Soviet Union, trade delegation, and that was established in the United Kingdom. And so we had a 100th anniversary last year. Went off, no one noticed it. I don't think there was any commemoration of it anywhere, but a centennial. What a week and a month to be doing this. I've been very grateful to Jeff Bezos and to Virgin for scheduling their activities so that they don't interfere with the Hampstead Garden Suburb Astronomical Society and our program. But I don't have to tell this audience that we've had some rather spectacular events on the 11th of July and the 20th of July. And we look to see what Elon Musk delivers in the future. And there's obviously a lot that's coming out of it. Most of that was geared, I think, certainly Jeff Bezos, to the Apollo landings in July 1969, the 20th of July. But it is poignant that it's also the 60th anniversary of a worldwide tour of Yuri Gagarin. And there's been some mention of it, but I was surprised there's not been more on the television. I don't know if I've missed it, but I have been surprised. So Yuri Gagarin, he'd actually gone round on the 12th of April, 1961. 60 years ago this year in Vostok 1. The total length, I know that I'm with an audience that may have more precise details, but let's say 1 hour 48 minutes is generally the figure quoted, and slightly different for the actual flight time. Was the rocket path over the suburb? I know that's the question we've all asked ourselves. Was he looking down to the suburb on his way back to the Soviet Union? I can give you the definitive answer, niet, Tavarich. He was not flying over the suburb. About circa 8 a.m. on that morning, the 12th of April, he was returning to the USSR from the southern tip of South America. And he was then coming up over the Atlantic, over most of Africa, and descending over the Red Sea to his eventual landing near the Volga River. He'd taken off near the Aral Sea, and he lands to the bemusement of some local farmers by the Volga River, who didn't have a phone, of course, nearby, so he had to get in a cart and travel off to the nearest place where he could get communication. He'd actually carried 10 days supplies of food. 10 days. He's up there for 1 hour, 48 minutes, but he'd got 10 days supplies of food, apparently. And it suggests that they were providing some additions in case he's in the most remote of places, and it's very difficult to find him when he eventually comes down. But he wasn't going over the suburb. And I've looked at some of the paths shown on the internet for it, and why on earth, setting off from Siberia or from the Soviet Union, do they go right down to South America and then right back up? It was pre-programmed, apparently, most of it. Very little controls in the vehicle that he was in compared with the Americans. And he goes, they do a path down to South America. I think it was that they were paranoid that the Americans would track the path of this unidentified object and consider, let's start World War III or whatever. And so a little known aspect, I'd be interested in comments as to whether there was that concern and a risk that we could have, on the 12th of April, had World War III ahead of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Anyway, he landed okay. Nothing is too good for the Hampstead Garden Suburb Astronomical Society. This is a pub sign in the City of London at the Globe, and gives you a flavour of the path, very unusual path, going back to the Soviet Union. He comes barely 90 days after, he comes to Britain, barely 90 days after his, amazing feat. He not only comes to Britain, but he comes for 4 days, and that visit is stretched to at least 5 days. He is on a world tour. He goes to Cuba. He then, I've talked to people who were looking after him in Sri Lanka and flying him around in Sri Lanka. And then he goes back to the Soviet Union and is the flavor of the year for November and in Moscow. In London, and talked to Andrew, and there are memories of people seeing him sweeping around London in an open top Rolls Royce, and he's actually assigned a number plate, YG1, to the Rolls Royce. This was actually totally illegal. There was an unauthorized number plate. It's a false number plate. There's another YG1 spinning around in Blackpool with a television personality called Yana Guest, YG, who was famous for being famous. I think that's the way some people put it. I can't remember her, but she was always on the television apparently, and she had a Mercedes. She'd got YG1, so YG1 is going around in Blackpool, and YG1 is with a police escort swanning around in London. On the 13th of July, the day before our visit to the suburb borders, Yuri Gagarin met the Lord Mayor, Sir Bernard Whaley Cohen. Sir Bernard Whaley Cohen. That gives us another link to the suburb borders. The Whaley Cohen family actually owned Athlone House, which is next to Kenwood and is still there today and is occupied by a Russian squillionaire and has restored it. The Athlone House had been an interesting place during the war as RAF Highgate, an intelligence school for escape and evasion, other things no doubt. And I think that it was the debriefing center, not for a V2 Supremo, not Werner von Braun, but an interesting senior person in the V1s called Max Wachtel. He came after the war, after we thought, well, the Werner von Braun's gone to America, of course, developed the Saturn V and all the rest of it. The rest is history. But Max Wachtel was brought over, friendly, to Hampstead, almost certainly to RAF Highgate, the intelligence school, and under his minder, Squadron Leader Kenny, and debriefed about if there was anything from the pulse jet engine, the V1, that Britain could learn. And he actually got married in Hampstead Registry Office. His future wife was brought over, and they had the wedding, and the best man was his minder, and they had the reception in Squadron Leader Kenny's flat. But going back to the Cohen family, who owned it up until the Second World War, when the RAF came in, from about 1919 to 1942, something like that. They were passionate about the Heath, and there is actually a Cohen Field named in honour of the Lord Mayor. Of course, City of London runs the Heath, named in honour of the Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor's family, and the passionate support for the Heath. So Cohen Field is right up there in the north of the Highgate string of ponds. So another sort of link to not ballistic missiles, but the German wonder weapons. I'll just mention one other thing that has a sort of looking down at the world from a long distance, the Earth from a long distance, with the Cohen family. The grandson of Bernard Whaley Cohen, Jack Whaley Cohen, is actually one of the principal directors of What Three Words, the 57 trillion grid of 3 meters by 3 meters, a global locator grid. I've been taking an interest in that, and I can tell you that one of my favorite places in the suburb, which is my compost heap, which qualifies as pocket best. There you go. So if ever I'm keel over from overworking in the allotment, I just have to go result pocket best, and I can be found deep in my compost heap. When Yuri Gagarin came to London the day before he was up in Highgate Cemetery, he had a packed schedule with the protocol, the diplomatic or the ceremonial. It starts off pretty much with the Mansion House, Bernard Whaley Cohen, and he has 30 minutes there. He then goes to Admiralty House and meets the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, and Buckingham Palace is lunch with the Queen. He gets light relief in the Tower of London, and confirms his worst fears about the capitalist society and the down-pressed proletariat. And in the evening, he's refreshed with a trade and friendship reception for the Britain-Soviet Union Society in the Hyde Park Hotel. Before that, he'd been at the Earl's Court and been invested with a medal by the Britain Planetary Society. And he also, all those films that you see of Russian astronauts with lump hammers bashing the pipe work to make the space station work, they're all true, because Yuri Gagarin, how did he prepare to be the first man in space? He'd actually been a foundry worker. And one of the days was allocated to Yuri Gagarin going up to Manchester and back again. And while he was in Manchester, he was a guest of the Union of Foundry Workers, the British Union of Foundry Workers. With all those receptions, I do provide the sort of information that you might need if you're going to entertain an astronaut or a cosmonaut. What chocolates do you offer a cosmonaut? Okay. It's interesting that most of our chocolate products seem to feature the universe: Mars, Aero, Galaxy, Milky Way. Who knows? We'll probably have some Jeff Bezos or Amazon chocolates before long. But the chocolates in space is quite a serious subject. On the 12th of April, in his 10-day ration pack, Yuri Gagarin had a tube of chocolate sauce. He only had 1 hour, 48 minutes, whether he actually broke into his pack, but there was the chocolate sauce there. The Apollo missions, I know you're getting a presentation on this, they were keen on chocolate puddings and brownies. Exactly 21 years to the day, NASA approved M&Ms for the space shuttle. There are approved chocolates when you go into space. You will never be embarrassed when you climb aboard Virgin Unity or into Elon Musk or the Blue Origin. You will have the right chocolates with you. And M&Ms are definitely approved by NASA. M&Ms are attractive because they don't fragment and cause crumbs, and you can play with them. I've seen videos of them floating in globules of water around the capsule, and the M&M doing interesting rotations that seem unworldly. You could get newspaper headlines to die for when our first person in space was a British person, was Helen Sharman, only recently awarded, I think, honours for continuing to do Foreign Office work beyond earthly bounds. She's the commander of St. Michael and St. George, which seems to be the order that is given to people with a space interest, because it's the nearest thing to meeting little green men, I suppose. She's doing planetary and astronomical work, and they seem to lump them into the order of St. Michael and St. George. I think there were 13,000 that she beat to get into the Mir program, learning Russian, of course, and a scientist, and all the training. But she'd had a background as a Mars flavorant chemist. So it was absolutely brilliant to say she was the girl from Mars. And Tim Peake, when he was in the International Space Station 25 years later, actually sent a 25-year greeting down to Helen Sharman. Helen Sharman had been at, I believe, at the unveiling of the Gagarin statue just off Pall Mall in 2009. There is a chocolate museum in Germany, Facebook page, because chocolate is out of this world. There you go. So he comes to the suburb border because he's paying his respects to Karl Marx. This is the memorial to Karl Marx in Highgate Cemetery. It had been put in its present location and this incredible memorial just 5 years earlier. There is Karl Marx seen from Waterloo Park. You can actually go into Waterloo Park and round to the boundary, the southern boundary. And interestingly, Karl Marx, for all time, gazes up at the kindness and generosity of another Lord Mayor, in this case, Sydney Waterloo. Waterloo Park, garden for the gardenless, 29 acres adjoining Highgate Cemetery that was given to, well, is presently managed by London Borough of Camden. So he's a Lord Mayor actually in the City of London in 1872, and that's contemporaneous with Karl Marx. It's also contemporary with Karl Marx and some of his interests. Marx is going around. He goes to the British Museum. He reads at the library. He's actually stands for elected office. So he's got a political interest. It was some sort of constable for pavements around Gospel Oak, but he didn't actually take up the office. However, it does suggest that he's got local political interests, and you've got a Lord Mayor with 29 acres just up the road from Gospel Oak. It's possible that Sidney Waterloo and Karl Marx actually met, or they sat on some committee, or were facing one another in the hustings one way or another. Another Lord Mayor, so Bernard Whaley-Cohen and Sidney Waterloo, both of them on the boundaries of Hampstead Lane, pretty much. There is a Karl Marx asteroid. I'm not sure quite how it fits with the International Astronomical Union and approvals, but in 1969, a 17-kilometer chunk of rock was named Karl Marx, and it seems to wander around the sun about 5 or 6 years, Earth years per rotation. When we look at the suburb and the area around the suburb, there's an awful lot of features off of the Earth's surface named after suburb and associated area personalities. I mean, H.G. Wells lived in Hampstead. He gets 2 craters, and indeed is associated with a 3rd crater with a suburb link. Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, is up there on the border in Highgate. He's got a whacking great big crater on Mercury. I've talked about Marx. Freud is Sigmund Freud in Swiss Cottage is interesting in that there's a little rim around the moon between the visible and invisible side of the moon. It's a very thin rim where features have been identified before we went probably around the far side. And interestingly, they named on that area between the visible and invisible, the conscious and unconscious, if you like, the dark and the light. There's a Freud crater. I think it's only 2 miles across or so. Down in deserves perhaps more credit, and I think a UCS school chum or contemporary for the Heaviside layer in terms of around the Earth's atmosphere. And then if you come down Swains Lane, on the other side of one of the big walls to the gardens, to the cemetery, Michael Faraday is there. John Zanacki, who is, I know, a friend to Highgate and has done presentations. He hasn't quite got a crater like that, but I'm going to talk about how he might have a crater. He was a Finchley schoolboy. He was a contemporary in terms of age of myself. And he actually, with Highgate School, they had the presence of mind to give them the day off. All the pupils got the day off. I'm in my primary school. That was no such luck. But he goes to Highgate Cemetery and he actually sees Yuri Gagarin, and his whole career takes off astronomical trajectory for the next 50, 60 odd years. He was, and I dare say he's spoken to you about it, a lead on the Huygens mission. And he actually has, my guess, I'd be happy if someone can confirm it, he is the person who's artificially shaped a planetary body furthest from the Earth. So the moon of Saturn, Titan, and there's filming of it going down there. It makes a 4.7-inch dent and slides 12 or 16 inches. And there's, after 4 seconds of dust, there's the Zanecki crater I offer. I was as a courtesy, I sent an email. I don't know John Zanecki, but I sent an email just saying that I'd be doing presentations. One I did on the Lord Mayor on the actual anniversary, 13th of July, attracted over 100 people on Zoom. And I've done other presentations, and I've led walks around Highgate and Highgate Cemetery. I talked to Highgate Cemetery about them commemorating the fact that Yuri Gagarin came, but didn't seem to have any luck there. Anyway, I told John Zanecki I was doing all this and that I'd be talking to the society. And he was very kind and sent his greetings. So on behalf of him, I am able to convey John Zanecki's greetings and his warm, he was quite warm appreciation that someone remembered that he'd been there when he was 11 years old. And in particular, I was quite pleased that I asked him when he was on the phone, I wasn't expecting him. I said, were there any teachers at Highgate School that actually inspired you? I mean, we all remember the rotten teachers and the dangerous teachers, but clearly Highgate School deserves some credit for the inspiration and the work he's gone on to do, and other people as well. In other spheres, there's a leading person in gliders was at Highgate School for decades, leading gliding associations and gliding interests. And he thought about it, and I don't think anyone had asked him this. And he said about Mr. Jones, who was the history teacher, the maths teacher, and Mr. Hughes, who was the science or physics teacher. And I'm looking at the books that were circulating at that time in schools and sixth forms in particular. And I was taught by a man called Nelcon. If any one of you remember Nelcon as a physics standard textbook for secondary school science and physics, I'd be interested. And I wondered whether his science book was by Nelcon. I said about H.G. Wells, and as far as I know, the only crater of a person associated with Hampstead Garden suburb at the present time, plenty of room for the future, is to someone who lived in Chatham Close, Hampstead Garden suburb, and they're linked to the planet Venus. A little clue there, probably don't need it, is that all the features on Venus are generally associated with women. And there's a 28-kilometer crater across named in honor of Dame Rebecca West. So she was associated with H.G. Wells. And that means that there's 3 craters on 3 different bodies associated with H.G. Wells. And in particular, Dame Rebecca West, Hampstead Garden suburb, holds the flame for Venus. Where do Martians come from? Okay, they come from Hemel Hempstead. I know that you may find this surprising, but just up the road from the garden suburb is definitely where people live in Martian territory. There's a whole raft of roads in Hemel Hempstead, a cluster of them, all named after planetary bodies and moons. Please say there's a Martian Avenue and Deimos Drive, but it goes on. Pluto Rise, Apollo Way, Saturn Way, Titan Road, Jupiter Drive, Mercury Walk, and the Lucas Sports Centre. I think that may be a clue as to why the Martians all live there, in that they've got this incredible links to early 20th century, 20th century development of aviation and I suppose some aspects of space. And it's interesting that there's a Mars rover test centre just outside Stevenage, and Tim Peake drives the rover around there, practicing it from the International Space Station with a downlink to Darmstadt and bouncing off satellites and so on, and testing the delay. Turn left and then wait 24 minutes, and then see if it turned left and wait 24 minutes to hear if it actually did do what you wanted it to do, where you wanted it to go. Lord Mayors, just widening a little bit, Lord Mayors have had an interest in Russia for a long time. And if you go back 5 centuries, this is one in St. Helens Bishopsgate, to Sir Andrew Judd. Andrew Judd, Judd Street in King's Cross, and a lot of other streets named after his benefactions. He clearly had a considerable interest in the Baltic, Russia, and trade to that area of Northern Europe. He actually was Lord Mayor of just before we lost Calais, and he was a Master of the Skinners about 7 times. So he was a real mover and shaker in the city. I'll do a separate presentation. He's not quite like Dick Whittington, Lord Mayor 4 times, but he did manage to have 3 Lady Mayoress wives. There you go. How do you manage that? The trade links are clearly there and continue. I mentioned about the Soviet trade delegation on Highgate West Hill, and that, if you look at it from the Heath, from the City of London's Heath, Hampstead Heath, you can see all the huge, they're probably not as big as they used to be, but the huge dishes on the top of the trade delegation. And it must be where they manage the ISS star liaison and any Roscomos trade opportunities. I will just say a little bit about I'll say a bit more about that, but before that, I'll just go back to Karl Marx. And it was actually 65 years ago, in 1956, that the monument was installed. The remains were moved from a much more modest grave that Karl Marx had in the 1880s when he died. A local resident had been the chief mourner, that was Engels. And there were only about 11 or 15 or so people at his funeral. However, Nikita Khrushchev and Nikolai Bulganin visited Britain, quite a long visit, 10 days or so. And they came on a huge cruiser, which got into a huge incident because of Buster Crabbe and someone looking at the propeller possibly, and a headless body and handless body of the believed to be Crabbe found floating later. Anyway, in 65 years ago, there'd been a Mansion House reception. I think it was a lunch, and Bulganin seemed to be very civilized, and Nikita Khrushchev looked like Nikita Khrushchev, and the Lord Mayor then was Sir Cullum Welsh. And they visited in their April visit. So it was only a month after the installation of the monument, which was masterminded by the Communist Society of Great Britain and Communist Party of Great Britain, and with one of their members as the sculptor. There are some people in and around the area in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and on, with an interest in space. If you listen on Radio 4 Extra, you get endless repeats of Journey into Space, and indeed Dan Dare sometimes. And Charles Chilton, MBE, who was a producer for the Goon Shows. Goon Shows did something immediately after some of these space events. They did about 3 space ones, and they did one virtually the day after Laika went into space in November 57, was it? Anyway, Charles Chilton wrote all the scripts for Journey into Space, which, as I say, you can hear on the radio now, and all the communications as they're traveling to Mars and visiting Mars. A lot of it's to do with radio communications. And he then became a guide. I lead guided walks, but he became a guide, a qualified guide in and around Hampstead. on the heritage of the Hampstead area. I don't think he did astronomy, but it'd be interesting. I would have liked to have spoken to him. I think he died about 2013. I'd like to have spoken to him. One thing I will say about the visit by Soviet premiers to Highgate Cemetery, to the area of Karl Marx, is that there's a fascinating chapter in Len Deighton's SSGB. It's nothing to do with the space race, the book. The book is a counterfactual history of what would have happened if pretty much after the Battle of Britain, Britain had been invaded and become a vassal state of the Nazi regime. And there's a whole chapter there, fascinating and very well written and very well researched by Len Deighton, published in 1974. It was in the television series a few years ago. And he actually posits a situation where it's Soviet Britain Friendship Week or Soviet Germany Friendship Week. And as a highlight of that, Molotov, a real person, I mean, I don't think was there in '56, comes over and is to accept the remains of Karl Marx ceremonially and with high commemoration, and take them back to Russia for reinterment and honouring in Red Square, no doubt. Anyway, it's a fascinating chapter about it. The English resistance actually puts the kibosh on this and blows up and causes vast casualties and confusion, which extends all the way to Archway Road and Highgate Hill and so on, and the bands, and everybody is injured, or there's severe casualties, and the whole thing is a bit of a disaster. Anyway, that's a Karl Marx memorial. There has been obviously trade and initiatives led by the Russians and BP, and there was a big exhibition. I didn't go to it at the Science Museum. 100,000 people in the first 5 months, and that was opened by Valentina Tereskova. And I dare say that Helen Sharman was there, and both of them have careers in space and science engagement and promotion. Indeed, Helen Sharman, I think, is still employed next door to the Science Museum at the Imperial College as science engagement, management of science promotion, that sort of thing. What have they done on other anniversaries? Well, not quite the anniversary, but an anniversary of landing on the moon, as it were. What would it have been, 40 years? Elena Gagarina, the daughter of Yuri Gagarin, unveiled the statue near Pall Mall, and John Zanacki was there, as well as Helen Sharman, I believe. And I was doing a presentation, and a former MP said he'd also been there because of his links to, I think, to British Council. Finding space in the City of London, space in the sense of astronomical space rather than commercial office letting space, which there seems to be a growing amount. 2,000 years ago, if you go to the Temple of Mithras, you can see exquisite astronomical, or more appropriately astrological renditions of the zodiac for the Temple of Mithras. The point is that this is a view before the building of the Bloomberg Centre, and underneath it is this brilliant reconstruction and restoration of the Temple of Mithras, which 1953 was excavated and has been restored onto the site at its level, 20 feet down. And the view across to the Bloomberg Centre and the Temple of Mithras is from St. Stephen's, Walbrook. And who was the vicar at St. Stephen's, Walbrook but Dr. Chad Varra, who founded the Samaritans? A little known fact is that Dr. Chad Varra, Reverend, founder of the Samaritans, also wrote the storylines for Dan Dare. The I'll be saying a little bit more about that, but rather poignantly, a lot of the space race has been based on V2 technology. Here's a V2 straight out of Tintin, if you like. And rather sadly, we had last year the 75th anniversary of a V2 destroying Smithfield, and a huge number of fatalities. The V2s, by and large, with a ton of warhead and the careful targeting and deception targeting, particularly with V1s, didn't cause a lot of casualties. They would some places they killed hundreds of people, but by and large it's one or two. The average was about one or two, or no people at all. But sadly, right at the end of the war, perhaps unexpectedly, on the 8th March 45, here in Smithfield, 110 people were killed. And on the 75th anniversary, there was a service at a normal Sunday service at St Bartholomew's the Great, and they remembered the casualties of that 75 years earlier. The city does have a fair number of pointers and indications about this astronomy, street names, star, sun. The walkie-scorchie, of course, with the rays of the sun projected down onto a Jaguar and causing 946 pounds worth of damage on Eastcheap, and the wonderful sundial on the London Stock Exchange, which 2004 or thereabouts, from the Kindersley Cardoza workshop up in Cambridge. And this strange looking sundial, it's no good trying to get it to tell you the time. You have to know precisely what time it is, that it's noon, and to be standing there, hopefully with the sun shining. And if you're standing there with the sun shining precisely at noon, it will tell you what day it is, what day of the year, what month, what day of the month, what day it is. Going over to the walkie-scorchie, the face of that, south face of that building, which I recommend going up if you get a chance, to the hanging gardens over 3 levels in the roof, focused all their energy onto the Jaguar XJ and caused the damage to, he was a tile salesman, Martin Lindsay, and actually correcting it cost about 10 million. Who was to blame? Raphael Vanoli had got previous form in Las Vegas, I believe, for the sun's rays causing unwanted disruptions. And Land Securities, I think, picked up the bill. I think there'd been some value engineering, things had been taken off of the original spec. All the consultants and contractors seemed to be able to walk away. I think Land Securities picked up the bill there. It came right at the time of the Great Fire of London anniversary, 2013, and that, in 2016 we had the actual 400th anniversary, and it's right on top of the monument area and Pudding Lane and so on, and people were frying eggs on Eastcheap pavements, and you can see a reflection there of the hairdressers on Eastcheap, and you couldn't sit in the hairdressers because your hair would be singed unintentionally by this 37-story building. Interesting, you're talking about light pollution. I dare say you ought to, and probably got, some fantastic images of the suburb at night from perhaps the International Space Station. I looked at one image from 2015 and tried to figure out what was the darkest place in the city at night. Looking at Hampstead Garden suburb on these very amateur pictures, reproduced and poor definition, but it is interesting to pick out the darkness of the suburb in the vicinity of Hampstead Heath. It's an interesting part of London. Anyway, the darkest place in the city at night is Temple Gardens. The river has a very dark return, as you'd expect, but actually in the city, Temple Gardens is big enough to give this very dark return compared with the other open spaces in the city and the squares like Finsbury Square and Finsbury Circus. What is the brightest? Well, I haven't done a scientific test of it, but just eyeballing it, I was amazed at how Tower Bridge came up as a strong return. The monument, of course, was designed at 202 feet high and is a monument to the Great Fire, but designed as a giant astronomical instrument. And who designed it but Robert Hooke? Robert Hooke, the father of lunar geology. I don't think it would have been a good idea to be in his parlor when he's doing showing off experiments. Apparently, he actually demonstrated how craters on the moon could be formed by discharging a pistol into sand. So you've got to look out for ricochets and whatever with him doing these scientific experiments. And of course, there's a crater on the moon named after him. In fact, quite a few Londoners, as I've mentioned with the suburb, have footprints across the solar system. Here's a few more. Mary Wollstonecraft has a crater 44 kilometers, I think, on Venus. I think there's about 900 on Venus. And on Mercury, there's about 400. They're not all people known in England, but there's something of a league table in the size of craters on Mercury. Shakespeare is about 365 meters across. And John Keats, another local resident, he has 107 kilometers across. Interestingly, Charles Dickens has to settle for something about half that size, 60 odd kilometers across. And I think that there are two new ones, wait for it, Louis Armstrong and Disney on Mercury. I think the International Astronomical Union have approved it. John Keats' crater was rather interesting because Keats' house is just down from the Hampstead Observatory. And on the 11th of November 2019 at noon, the sun was shining, there wasn't too much cloud. And Mercury did a transit across the face of the sun, about 6 hours or so. And I was delighted to be there. I was there a couple of years earlier. They come about 6 a century and they come sort of in pairs. The next one is 2032. And I was at both of them in recent years and I was there then. And I wrote a poem, Keats would have been horrified, to Simon, the curator there. And I forced him to listen to my poem all about Keats and sky freighters, and because everything rhymes with crater. It was a joy to write. And there was all the people there bemused as they watched this tiny little dot slowly crossing the surface of the sun. He was quite interested in astronomy. He gets a prize as a schoolboy over in Edmonton, excuse me, 1811. And it's an introduction to astronomy. And then his poems, he has one, then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken. It was heaven sent for the 11th of November 2019, I venture to offer, just up from where he lived. And here's a few little bits from the poem. Heavenward noon waiters, ad astral spectators, solar transits, Keats' crater, aboard its sky freighter, winged Mercury's communicator, and Keats' celestial navigator. It's a joy to have crater in a poem. Astronomical hotspots in the city. Just a short roundup of some a concentration in the southwest part of the city. Quite surprised me when I started to add them up. Blackfriars area. Well, back to Dan Dare and the Chadvara at the St. Stephen's Walbrook. The Dan Dare and the Eagle was actually produced in the city at Hulton Press in Shoe Lane, right in front of St. Bride's. So there you go. And that was 70 years ago last year, 14th of April. was the launch date, and its launch. It was all produced by clergymen. Marcus Morris was the editor, and then he brings in Chad Varra to write the storylines. And there you've got it with them crossing Mars. And there's an interesting character in the little screen image on their dashboard. And that's Sir Hubert Guest, who was born in 1943, as Dan Dare goes. And wait for it, English, was the second person to walk on the moon. So Buzz Aldrin, eat your heart out. It was Sir Hubert Guest, who's subsequently rose to great offices in the space fleet of the United Kingdom. I mean, you look at Dan Dare and the confidence that Britain would be leading the space race and be a major contender in astronomical initiatives. It was absolutely a given. There was no doubt about it in the early 50s. If you look at back in Blackfriars at the Brideswell Palace, which is on the west side of Old Bridge Street, down to the Thames, and is above the Fleet River. That's where the Ambassadors by Hans Holbein was painted with these French diplomats, 1533. And there was a fascinating study by the late Professor John North about the astronomical instruments and what they told us about the timing of that sitting. And he postulated that all these astronomical instruments had pointed to 4 p.m. on Good Friday, the 11th of April, 1533, with incredible Easter significance. Anyway, certainly a lot of those instruments would have been produced by City of London worshipful companies, and we've got 110 companies. There's the names of people that are automatically and obviously associated, and those with a little shield, they have global or astronomical symbols in their coats of arms. And that brings us to the College of Arms. For 5 centuries, a virtual birthplace of galaxies and stars has been Queen Victoria Street and the College of Arms, because they are constantly producing heraldry and they love using all sorts of astronomical images. There they are. We just got a new Garter King of Arms, former Somerset Herald, David White, only in the last week or so, end of June. And so you get star mullets for the De Veres in this particular image here, and suns in splendor. These were both critical for the Battle of Barnet, and people confusing the astronomical symbols on the 14th of April in amongst the fog 5 miles up from the Garden suburb, when the Battle of Barnet was literally the fog of war. And in coats of arms, you get instruments that perhaps nobody knows what they were designed for, but astrolabes and globes feature prominently. If that wasn't enough, the Blackfriars, the Dominican order of Blackfriars at Blackfriars, they follow St. Dominic. And St. Dominic, Blackfriars headquartered, was patron of astronomers. Why is St. Dominic patron of astronomers? His associated symbol is a star. We're coming up to the 8th of August and sort of an 800th anniversary last year of the Dominicans in this country. And I wondered if it's because it's close to the Perseids. There is a patron saint of astronauts, and that's on the 18th of September. But he seems to have been allocated patronage of astronauts because he was good at jumping. They called him the Flying Friar. There you go. That's how you get to be a saint. The Dominicans get kicked out and it becomes Shakespeare's power centre for his playhouse and island yard and property ownership and pubs and leases he's picking up in that area. And I think he may well have put an early version of Midsummer Night's Dream. And there you've got Robin Goodfellow and Puck. I'll put a girdle round the earth in 40 minutes, taking off from Cape Canaveral in a wood in Athens and getting back in 40 minutes. Yuri Gagarin's girdle around the earth generally put at 109 minutes of that 148 minutes. So even now, and even with the International Space Station, we're only halfway towards what Puck was achieving 400 years ago. Church Scientology is based down there, and they, of course, have some interesting high-profile members, Tom Cruise and John Travolta, and they have a particular interest in Venus, enough said. So, quite a bit going on in Blackfriars, and wonderful for an astronomical walk around the city, and some interesting sundials down by the Millennium Bridge. Is there a stellar future? The answer is yes. Satellite insurance, Lloyd's, communications, data, microsecond trading. They were Lloyd's were doing Telstar and the first satellite, British satellite, and they were involved in the European Space Agency one that has just a couple of years ago now. 365 million possible hit there. So thank you very much. Any questions? But just finally, a postscript. Yuri Gagarin sadly died in a MiG-15 plane crash in 1968. And the International Space Station goes around about 15 times per day. That's about one orbit per 1.5 hours. Well, I've been going about an hour and we've got time for questions. So the International Space Station goes around just about the same time as our scheduled talk this evening. So hello, International Space Station. We can wave to them. Maybe they're listening in. I don't know who else is on the Zoom program. So thank you very much.
Great. Lester, thank you very much for that. That was really brilliant. I loved all the connections that you had between everything, and I've got a few questions, but I'd like everybody to unmute themselves now so that we can question Lester. And I wanted to start off going back to Yuri Gagarin. You said he took 10 days worth of food in his in the Vostok capsule. Do you know how long it actually took them to pick him up? Did he have to sort of tuck into any of those, or did he,
the farmers that were bemused when they saw this strange creature suddenly arrive, they may have been able to offer him some fresh produce, and but they seemed to be a bit guarded and a bit suspicious, or there was a sense of standoffishness there. I don't know the precise timing, but it wasn't that remote. I mean, it was getting to somewhere where they could communicate, and then they probably could get to him relatively quickly, but it was some distance off. And it gets into complicated things about how he actually landed. I mean, it wasn't in the capsule, and the Americans say that they actually sent the capsule up and brought the capsule back. And there's questions about the distance between the two, but I'm not taking anything away from where he started off. But I'm not taking anything away from a remarkable achievement and a diplomatic coup around the world afterwards. Yes. Anyway, thank you.
It's quite interesting when you also mentioned that the Vostok was pre-programmed, which sort of reminds you a little bit of the Jeff Bezos's recent recent flight, which was, you know, totally pre-programmed. He went up and went down again, but I somehow doubt whether he took much food with him, but who knows.
And there's actually problems, and Virgin Unity, the strapping into the harness system where you're sitting actually causes all sorts of bodily function complications. So actually eating while you're on board may not be a good idea. Anyway, I won't go into that, but he's in his 70s, but Richard Branson did remark he actually is probably going to get his astronaut's wings, and the question is opening, as we've heard, as to whether Jeff Bezos will get them, and whether the Federal Aviation Authority is actually going to save themselves a lot of bother by not awarding astronaut wings to every single tourist that goes up for the next 10 or 20 years. So anyway, eating in space has got its complications, or taking fluids and dealing with it subsequently. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions I'll try and field?
Well, I've got another one for you. Actually, you mentioned Heaviside was at UCS, and then
no, not Heaviside. It was Kennelly. They sometimes call it the Heaviside Kennelly layer, something like that is the name. Right. But I understand that the Kennelly bloke actually went to UCS. Oliver Heaviside had a very weird upbringing. He lived in Platt Street, just off. His mother, I think, ran a school in the late 1800s. In Camden Town, and he sort of went to that, and then he had a job up in he didn't really go to university or anything, but he had a job up in Newcastle, and then he sort of gave that up, and he had profound deafness, and he didn't really work after that, and he made his living, eked out a living, very sort of sparse lifestyle. And he was sort of eccentric. That's the word. He was an eccentric, and he, from writing articles and that sort of thing. And he was the first person to be awarded the Faraday Medal when they instituted the Faraday Medal. So there's a link. I think he died in Dorset, somewhere down there. So he's not back in London. But he was brought up at the in Camden Town.
And talking of Faraday, was Michael Faraday? Did he live on the suburb or somewhere near the suburb?
I don't think so. It's just that his burial place is in Highgate Cemetery. It's a rather splendid memorial, and it's right by the wall. It's actually sort of props up the wall. You can't see it from the road. But on the other side of one of those great big walls on Swains Lane, that steep hill, there is the Michael Faraday Memorial. And while we're on loose links to space, you've got the resting place of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So Douglas Adams is buried in Highgate Cemetery. And I've tried to get the Highgate Cemetery interested in that. I dare say there'll be other names that crop up with links to astronomy and popular culture, to engineering, technology, visitors. There's a story to tell there, but I couldn't get them interested, unfortunately, and especially in this month. They did have a big puff in the Camden New Journal about Sydney Waterloo, but nothing about the Karl Marx, the chance to see Karl Marx monument. And it's quite a long way down into the cemetery, and it's unmistakable, though. You can tell from a very long distance off that that's the Karl Marx Memorial. What I cannot understand is we just had the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx's birth. And not linked to that and not seemingly any reason, the monument has been attacked, seriously attacked. To attack a huge granite monument like that takes some doing, but they did some damage to the lettering and so on, very difficult to restore. And it is a grade 1 listed structure. Interesting why that was the case. And it didn't seem to be anything related to the 200th anniversary. The 200th anniversary itself passed fairly modestly. I was surprised. I was surprised in 2018, May 2018. I did lead some walks associated with it in and around Hampstead. And of course, there's the Engels link to Primrose Hill. And of course, Lenin in King's Cross.
And coming back to Faraday, he also is buried in Highgate Cemetery,
yes.
Isn't
he? Yes.
Yeah. No, the reason I asked that question is I remember my grandmother, who lived on the suburb, mentioning a Miss Faraday, who I think might have been his daughter, who lived on the suburb somewhere.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Oh, well, I'll have to look at the craters on Venus. I haven't go through that list of 900 again. It might have got one in.
Andrew, as I'm sitting in Moscow, I think it's, I'll make a few comments. Sorry if you get a rogue violinist. Can you hear me?
You keep cutting out, actually, Rupert.
Right. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. No, I was just going to make one comment about Yuri Gagarin. I don't know if you know this, but he was actually a very small guy, because Vostok 1 was a ballistic missile, and they actually find the guy who could fit into the nose cone. You know, it was a weight problem. They really had to find someone quite small to, you know, get on that rocket.
Yes, absolutely right. Yeah, and interestingly, when they chose the dog, they chose Leica because of its skin tones. Shows up better on film, photographs from the capsule. And there were 3. I mean, there's a book been written about the whole dog story. And there were 3 with a reserve and a test, a marker dog. But they were all strays from Moscow, it seems. But it had colouring that looked better on photographs. There you go.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I remember going to the cosmonauts exhibition at the Science Museum, and they had a I think it was a Vostok cap. Anyway, it's the one that Valentina Tereshkova went up in, and it was extraordinary how tiny they were. I mean, they had like a sort of bath type thing that you had to, which is sort of molded to the body, which you had to sort of fit in. It looked extremely uncomfortable.
I'm pleased that you went to see the exhibition, and it did attract quite a lot. It was 14 quid to go in, but it attracted a lot of people.
Absolutely brilliant. I thought it was a fantastic exhibition.
Can I tell you a funny story that at King's Cross, at the development behind the railway lands, there's all sorts of offices have gone in there, and of course there's all the deep mind and artificial intelligence and the Alan Turing Institute, the Crick, Google, of course. There's the sort of digital playground of Samsung, and there's YouTube. But there's one building, it's a sort of pink building, just along from the Aga Khan University. So it's at the towards the northeastern part of the site. And it's an office building. I don't know if it's a Google one. They've got about 4 buildings there. It might be a Google one, but in the promotional literature of the office, I saw only a capsule, like an Apollo capsule on the tour in the office. There you go. How they got it up there, or if it's a real one, but obviously their decision was to have a real chunky piece of kit, and it looked as if it had been through the wars, sitting there in the corner of a prime office space in the King's Cross development at enormous cost, with wonderful views, but nobody can see out of it. I suppose you could get in the capsule. Anyway, I was amazed to see that there. And the business, I don't think, had any particular links with it. There you go.
I was interested in your comment about Robert Hooke, because we had a talk not that long ago about Robert Hooke, but I don't recall the fact that the monument had been built as an astronomical instrument. Yes. I just wondered if you knew anything more about that.
Yes, okay, thanks. Well, there are probably a number of links to it. In particular, if you go up the staircase, it was designed for a pendulum. So there's going to be a very accurate system of measuring with this whacking great big long pendulum. And I dare say there were other experiments and observation opportunities that they were looking for, but they found instantly that it wasn't going to work, because even in this post-medieval period, 1666, the vibrations on the roads and the traffic and generally at ground level caused all sorts of problems. So it just was never going to happen. Yeah.
I know you mentioned the Temple of Mithras. Will you say that was near St. Stephen's, Morbrook? Or?
Absolutely. It's a museum. You can go in there. It's free to go in. It's very well financed, I should imagine, by Bloomberg. Thank you very much. And it's been reopened. You have to sort of book, but it's not that busy now. It was very popular when it first opened a couple of years ago. There's a sort of interpretation facilities at ground level. There's a sort of holding area with some of the exhibits, some priceless sort of exhibits and alabasters and interpretation facilities on a medium level down. And then you go down to the actual Temple of Mithras, and it's all geared, in my opinion, to days of the week, 7 days of the week and months. And right at the end is a modest chamber, I suppose 35 feet or so in length. You wouldn't get an enormous number of people there. And it was secretive. There's 700 odd Mithraic buildings around the Roman Empire. And there's, I think, at least 4 in this country. But this is a rather spectacular one, and they found all sorts of other archaeological stuff, including the wax tablets, 400 wax tablets with ephemera, saying about giving all sorts of indications of rebirth of London after the fire of Boudica in AD 60s. Anyway, if you look, and they do it with lights and simulated smoke and detail and music, they give you a feel for what's going on in this Temple of Mithras, and everybody's focus is on this zodiac at the far end, very large stone zodiac, carved, very carefully carved, very clear symbolism of the zodiac and the seasons and the sun and moon and so on, which seems to be the focus of this secretive sect. Just to lighten it a bit, they were not averse to Tommy Cooper sort of comedy, because they found, not at the City of London, but they found Tommy Cooper type gag accoutrements, one of which is like the arrow that goes through your neck with a a loop around at the back. You walk around with an arrow through your neck. So I don't think they were quite serious astronomers all the time there. But comedy was important. Going back to the things found there, not necessarily associated with the Temple of Mithras, but it was a trading place. It was a place to do business. I think it was like a sort of veterans or a retired sergeant's mess would be the best thing to call it. They're all auxiliaries. They're all from different countries. They've all got different skills. They're self-employed. They're developing businesses for themselves. Some of them are still serving, perhaps, in the military. It's a bit sort of secret society, Freemasonry type thing. But they're doing trade, and in these 400 odd, it's a palimpsest of waxes, and the wax is gone, but it's the indent in the wood, and it's, you know, years and years of different messages with little bits all on top of one another. And they found things there saying about send 20 loads to St. Albans at a quarter of a denarius per load, which gave them indications that trade was up and running very soon after the sacking of London. And they also came across references to craft beers, Tertius, the brewer, and he crops up in Cumbria as well. So there was obviously a craft brewery and loyalty towards beers all over the country, and Tertius, the brewer. There you go. So camera, eat your heart out. Nothing new.
Brilliant.
I do recommend going to the Temple of Mithras. Could I ask for a show of hands? Anybody who's been there?
Okay.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Rupert, you've written quite a bit about the cult.
Yeah, I mean,
Mithras.
the Zodiac is, I hope you can hear me. The Zodiac is actually in the Museum of London. The one in the temple is actually a replica, I think. And what that Zodiac shows is, actually it shows sort of end of the world prior to the equinox moving to Aquarius. You know, it's this dawning of the age of Aquarius, but it's actually shown on that that Zodiac. The Zodiac goes, you've got Mithras swaying the bull, and you've got the Zodiac going around, and you've got these two characters, one with a torch raised and another torch down, and the character with the torch down is indicating the end of that world age, because Mithras is derived from Mithra, which is basically an Iranian deity. You know, so the Roman Empire, even though it became a dominant religion 2,000 years ago, it's a much older religion from Iran and goes back a long, long way. And again, it's very much an astronomical type of idea, and ties up with well, okay, I won't go into too much of my stuff, but it's basically the idea that there's a lot of astro mythology around some very large object that turns up occasionally, and Mithras is part of that story.
I find it incredible that up until 50 years ago, we were all carrying denarius around in our pockets. Everyone was carrying denarius around in our pockets, and we were writing everything down in denarius. Unbelievable. 240 denarius to the pound.
Yeah.
I took, when I take groups to the Temple of Mithras, I hand them out a denarius each and a little sachet of salt.
Right.
It's a day's pay.
Yeah, perfect.
Interesting what you said, and I'm very grateful for your expertise. The Fijian cat, do you find that there's any hint towards, you mentioned Iran, any hint towards Turkey, and further information about just what was the belief and where it came from?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, it's Scythian. I'm not sure where that cat actually comes from. It might be, no, it will be from those sort of Indo-European peoples in Iran. But what I'm saying is the religion itself, I mean, Mithras is based on this much earlier religion, and its coverage is all the sort of Zoroastrian peoples. This is obviously way back before Islam or anything like that. And you get these fire temples. And so what I'm saying is that Roman religion is sort of like a rebirth or a reconstruction of something much older. And so all of these fire temples are on top of mountains. They're probably observatories, I mean, high ground anyway. And it's, you know, sacred flame and, you know, this sort of idea. But there's a strong element of, yeah, I mean, it's a strong element of astronomical observation, the planets, and the thing that, okay, people find a bit surprising is that, you know, for example, precession of the equinoxes attributed to the Greeks about 300 BC. But in that Mithra, I could keep confusing the words. Mithra is the name of the religion in Iran. Mithras is the Roman version. It seems they are aware of the change of the equinox long before the Greeks, just in some of the way they're carving these zodiacs. And so, anyway, I mean, just saying, it's quite a deep story there. Have a look at my book, Cataclysms and Renewals. I mean, you know, it's a terrible thing. You read all this stuff, you write it, and you actually forget all the details. I have to read my own book sometimes to remember what precisely the details are. You know? Yeah, but so I'm sort of, it's an evolving, it's like an evolving knowledge base anyway. You have to just keep deep digging into it. But no, it's fascinating. There's a huge amount of astronomical symbolism in a lot of these early religions.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was interested as well with the that you were pointing out the analemma marker on the stock exchange building. I had no idea that it was there, and I'd never come across analemmas before. But a few years ago, I was at the Astrofest, and I went to one of the stalls which was selling little bits of jewelry. And I thought I would surprise my wife with a little pendant, which was an analemma. And it's quite interesting. I hadn't realized that the sun describes this figure of 8, as it were, in the sky at different times of the year. I thought it might be an idea to sort of try photographing it or something to see whether you could.
I did actually last year. I did actually lead. Sorry. I did actually lead a walk in the city of London, and we started at noon at that sundial, and we did actually take the shadow photo on the 29th of February. So there's that one day of the every 4 years when it hits that point. There is a slight problem for the London Stock Exchange. There's a brilliant piece of work in terms of 24 hours around the world, global concept of the sundial, but it's going out of alignment. We were talking about it earlier, and so some people may not have heard us when we were talking earlier on this evening. It's going out of alignment, and within 40 years, it'll be out completely. So I don't know, we were talking about whether they have to pull down the London Stock Exchange, but it would be very difficult, I suspect, to recalibrate it. That's all etched onto the stone there, with 366 entries over, 3 or 4 stories of sculpture. The Cardoza workshop in Cambridge, they did the, I've met them, and Lydia Cardoza, and they did the original Richard III monument in Leicester Cathedral in the 1980s or thereabouts, before we all found where Richard III was, and comes 2015, March 2015, we had the ceremonial reinterment with a new treatment completely. I don't know what perhaps they put the old one in the museum. Anyway, that's about sculptures.
Could I make a little comment there? I mean, okay, it's one thing to say, okay, the building's going out of date, it's no longer functional, but in fact, it's a fantastic thing because it's a time marker. What it's showing is at a particular date, the equinox, the pole was located in a particular position. And in fact, for archaeological astronomy, you know, it's actually quite amazing. You can, if you've got a good date for a structure and you know how it's orientated, you've actually got a long duration measure of the precession. You know, because actually we sort of assume it, we don't actually measure it. But if you've got a whole bunch of buildings over hundreds of years, which are orientated in a very precise way, you actually have a sort of like a scientific data point for the location of the pole and the equinox. Okay, so what I'm saying, it's a great thing. You know, they've got a building that's now set in stone, the orientation of the planet at a particular time.
Mm. Well, I understand and I agree with you. I hope you're right, but I fear that the hedge funds or the developers would be a tough one to ask of them. I'd offer you two other things. Also buried in Highgate Cemetery is Patrick Weinmark, the Power Game, which used to start off in that area. So you can redevelop that area and produce something better, which I believe we have something better than it was in the Power Game used to come on our televisions. And the actual Paternoster Square is about the same dimensions, 194 feet, as the first moonwalk. They go 200 and a quarter thousand miles, and they actually walk 194 feet or something like that, which measuring it out in the city is about the size of the Paternoster Square. So another measure for us. Thank you.
Tougher gravity.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Lester, thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions, but if not, Lester, thank you very much, and we'll give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
Watching our show.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for attending, and hopefully we'll see you all next month for Apollo 15. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great summer. And Lester, thanks once again, and I hope to go on one of your walks one day. Fascinating connections there. Terrific.
Pleasure. You're very well.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night. Bye.